Hello everyone, and welcome to this webinar on vertically integrated projects for sustainable development at the University of Strathclyde. Thank you very much for joining us. I'm Louise Logan and I'm the Programme Coordinator for VIP for Sustainable Development. I'll be chairing today's session in which we'll hear from my colleagues Professor Steve Marshall and Dr. Scott Strachan. They'll be giving you an overview of the programme and explain how VIP for Sustainable Development works as a model for embedding education for sustainable development in undergraduate curricula. We should have about half an hour for questions at the end, so can I please ask you to submit questions via the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen, and the chat is also open for discussions, but please submit questions through the Q&A. So first we'll be hearing from Professor Stephen Marshall. Steve is the director of the VIP programme at Strathclyde, which he launched here in 2012. He also established Strathclyde's Hyperspectral Imaging Centre and is a fellow of the Institution for Engineering and Technology and a senior member of the Institute for Electrical and Electronics Engineers. We'll then hear from Dr. Scott Strachan. Scott is the co-director of the VIP programme and he has worked with Steve since 2016 to align the programme with the SDGs in light of Agenda 2030. He's a senior teaching fellow in Tripoli, where he founded the department's Gambia Solar Project, a staff student initiative delivering off-grid solar PV systems to rural schools and health clinics. His research is focused on developing off-grid and electronic cooking systems for rural communities in the Gambia, Malawi, Rwanda and India. So I'll now hand over to Steve.
Hello everybody. I'd just like to set the scene a little bit in terms of the vertically integrated project programme. This is something that we at Strathclyde identified as being a really valuable way of engaging undergraduates. It was a program which was developed at Georgia Tech in the US, and we took that and we implemented it here. And we were the first university to take it and implement it after the originators of Georgia Tech. And now there's a worldwide consortium of almost 40 universities, some of which we've helped to recruit, that take part in the vertically integrated project consortium. We took the VIP program and we used it across the curriculum. So originally it had been developed for engineering students. We implemented it in entrepreneurship, in arts and humanities, in social science and in wet science, and we showed that it could work across the board to give a fantastic student experience and also deliver real projects. And that program ran from 2012, and there were a number of VIP projects within that, including Scott's working with the Gambia. And then about 4 years ago, we had this idea, particularly driven by Scott, where we could use the VIP program as a delivery mechanism to get undergraduates engaged in sustainable development projects and address the UN Sustainable Development Goals. So we looked at our VIP projects, and most of them aligned pretty naturally with those SDGs. And so we're driving that forward, and it's a way of getting students not only to do and learn about sustainable development, but actually deliver real projects in that area. So I'm going to hand over now to Scott, who'll tell you how we've taken the VIPs and transformed that into VIP for sustainable development. Over to you, Scott.
Okay, thanks, Steve. Everybody hear me okay? See the slides okay, Steve? Good, okay. Okay, everyone, so as Steve introduced me there, I'm Scott Strachan. I'm a senior teaching fellow in the Department for Electronic and Electrical Engineering at Strathclyde, and I've been part of the VIP since it began in 2012 as well. I'm also the co-lead for the centre's education awareness raising strand, along with Lizanne Bonner from Haas. And before I start, I'd like to give you just a bit of background in terms of where I'm from, if you like. So before I became a senior teaching fellow, before I even joined the university, I was an electrician at one point. And I made my way through further education to do my degree and my PhD at Strathclyde. And as was mentioned in my introduction there from Louise, in 2007, I started up, along with my colleague Mike Dolan, the Gambia Solar Project. And that really is a staff student-led initiative to take students to the rural areas of the Gambia and install off-grid solar photovoltaic PV systems in remote village schools and health centres there. And we've also done the same in India as well on a couple of occasions. So I've been invited. Hello?
Scott, sorry, just to say you're on presenter, you're not on presenter view, or you are on
All
presenter
right,
view,
okay.
sorry.
Hold on a sec. Is that better?
Yeah, that's fine, thanks.
Right, okay, okay. So, yeah, lost my thread there a wee bit. Aye, so basically I've been invited here today to try and demonstrate to you how our VIP for Sustainable Development programme, how we've managed to embed research-based education for sustainable development in our undergraduate curricula through that programme. As Steve said, it's using VIP, this vertically integrated project model that came from Georgia Tech as a delivery mechanism for that. I'd also like to touch on why we've done this, and also mention some of the challenges that we faced in doing this also and continue to face. It's not an easy task to try and embed this new type of teaching and learning in our institution, or indeed any other higher education institution, but I think it's something that we're definitely making some good progress on. And hopefully show that this is a model that can be replicated in other institutions. So before we really get going, I also want to pose a couple of these questions to you, just for you to think about as we make our way through this webinar. So I'd like you to think about how you can embed, if you're a teacher obviously, how you can embed ESD in your teaching, education for sustainable development in your teaching, and how you might see the VIP for sustainable development model again fitting within your subject, or if you're joining us from another institution, how you might see that programme fit within your institution. And please feel free to use the chat function to do that. So it's always good to start a presentation, I think, with a thought-provoking quote from someone much more inspirational than yourself. And that's what I'll try and do here. So we meet in an hour of change and challenge, in a decade of hope and fear, in an age of both knowledge and ignorance. The greater our knowledge unfolds, the greater our ignorance unfolds. So these were the words that were spoken by JFK during his famous moon speech at Rice Stadium. And as you'll know, he more famously went on to say, people ask why the moon? Well, because we choose to go to the moon. This is a challenge that we are willing to accept, one we are unwilling to postpone, and one that we intend to win. And for many in mission control that day, as you can see here, this was their first job since graduating from university. Most had been appointed to engineering and scientific sections based solely on their application forms, their college grades, no interview, no previous work experience. And so perhaps the most incredible thing about this feat was the fact that the average age of mission control that day was 26. In fact, some of them were even as young as 22 or 23. So there is an unfortunate lack of diversity in many ways within this group, as we can see here, something that speaks a lot of the time in US history. But we can acknowledge that these young people, or these young men as it was at the time, made mission critical decisions. They had a lot of responsibility, and none more so perhaps than the guy right at the back in the middle, Steve Bales. He was the chief guidance officer again 26 years of age, who quite famously, with 13 minutes to go to landing of the Eagle spacecraft, had to make a abort or go call following an unexpected alarm. So a 26-year-old making a decision that had a resounding and long-lasting global impact in many different ways, even in geopolitical ways as well. If you think about the role of the space race and gaining soft power at the time. And so when we look back at these words today, you know, they have an eerie resonance in the context of the new grand and global challenges of our time. Not an extraterrestrial challenge to explore unknown worlds, but an existential challenge to save the world we know, with no question of it being motivated by vanity or ideology, but quite simply by need. And the roots of this climate emergency we can trace back to one key moment in technical innovation in human history, the invention of the steam engine by a native Scot over 200 years ago. And since then, there's been a rise of 1 degree in average Earth temperature, taking us to almost 2/3 of the way towards that 1.5 degree limit that climate scientists in the Paris Agreement has urged us to stay below, but it's still climbing, with 20 of the warmest years on record occurring in the last 22 years. And the climate scientists have told us that, you know, if we keep going on this track, then by 2100, that could be 4 or 5 degrees increase, which could lead to tipping points that cause irreversible damage to our planetary health systems. In fact, many climate scientists now argue we've reached a new geological epoch and that we're moving out of a period of 11 years of relative climatic stability, one that was so stable and predictable that we were actually able to invent agriculture during it, and moving into a new one that they're calling the Anthropocene, a new age defined by us and the impact we anthropoids have had and continue to have on Earth systems. And I suppose what everybody wants to know is, you know, what and when is the end point of all of this if we continue with business as usual? And who knows? But again, many scientists are quick to point out that we may be in or about to enter the 6th mass extinction. We've had 5 of them over the last 500 million years, the last one being 65 million years ago, when an asteroid obviously impacted the Earth and killed off the dinosaurs. So I suppose they can do much about that. The good news for us is that we still can. There is still a window of opportunity here. And if we needed a reminder of the urgency of the situation you face, and as we'll see, the role of higher education as a cornerstone of human, social, environmental, and economic development, and the role that it will play in addressing these challenges, then we can consider that in the context of a recent global event that's touched the lives of us all, COVID-19. So I suppose one transitory positive that's come out of the global lockdown as a result of COVID-19 and pandemic has been reduced CO2 emissions, offering, as I say, some kind of transitory planetary respite and cleaning the air we breathe. As you can see here with the before and after shot of New Delhi's India Gate War Memorial on October 19th, and then again in April 2020. And I'll let you kind of decide which one is which. But to avoid the 1.5 degrees C increase in the Paris Agreement set out, that requires a 7.6% reduction in emissions each year until 2050. That's equivalent to what we've saved during this pandemic. That's a pandemic's worth of emissions reduction every year for the next 30 years from now until 2050. Now, obviously, we need a more sustainable approach to achieving this than a global lockdown offers. And it's clear that the coming decade will be one of recovery, but many politicians, UN bodies, business leaders are suggesting that this could perhaps be also one of opportunity, where we put in place new and more policies designed to ensure we build back better, greener and fairer. And the UN Sustainable Development Goals provide us with a framework for this, one that will allow us to build back better from this crisis and achieve this climate goal and others. So I'm unaware of exactly what the range of the audience is. So many people, apologies if I'm kind of teaching my granny to suck eggs, as we used to say in the west of Scotland. But I want to start off by just making it clear, you know, certainly how I understand the definition of sustainable development. So the United Nations Conference on Human Environment agreed upon a declaration containing 26 principles in 1972 concerning the environment and development, much of which still resonates with the 17 SDGs and their targets. The term sustainable development was first really defined in the 1987 Brundtland report, its official name being our Common Future report. And the definition was sustainable development is development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. And it's been a long road of Earth summits and IPCC reports and UN conferences and public activism that led to the SDGs, which was in fact the result of the largest consultation programme the UN had ever undertaken, involving citizens, civil society, academia, private sector, local, regional, national governments, etc. And unlike their predecessors, the Millennium Development Goals, not only was there more of them, they applied to developed and developing nations. So everyone is now accountable for progress on these global goals. And the Brundtland report in 1987 also went on to say that sustainable development is fundamentally about trying to achieve a balance between the economy, the society, our society, and the environment. And this led to the notion of there being these three main pillars of sustainable development: the economy, society, and the environment, or the 3 Ps of prosperity, people and planet, as they've also been referred to. However, understanding the interrelationships between these goals and the context of these 3 pillars here, where measures taken to achieve the targets of one can often impact either positively or negatively those of another, can be quite a complex task. And how these goals impact in these 3 main pillars of sustainable development, our society, economy, and environment, is also complex in its understanding as well. And you'll see that among these sustainable development goals, or SDGs, or global goals, goal number 13, climate action, not particularly easy to find amongst other 16, you might think, tucked away down there at the bottom left-hand corner. And while climate change mitigation and adaptation is essential for securing our future, undoubtedly, it's also important that the future for us all is socially and economically fair and just. And in fact, just as climate change can impact on our safety and well-being, our safety and well-being is the foundation in which we can make the changes we need to protect our climate and our environment. It's difficult to do much about climate change when you're sleeping in a shop doorway, or you spend 4 hours a day searching for water to drink that will also risk you going blind, or worse, when you finally take a sip, or if you're spending your day collecting wood to cook with, as 3 billion people currently do every day, the fumes of which cause indoor air pollution that claims the life of 4 million people a year. And this is part of the reason for the redefining of this framework by the Stockholm Resilience Centre, shown here affectionately called the Wedding Cake for fans of Great British Bake Off, which presented a new integrated framework aligning these goals with the 3 main pillars of sustainable development, those pillars of the economy, society, and the environment. But critically, what they also show here is the emphasis on the non-negotiable SDGs 6, 13, 14 and 15, shown here, affecting our environment, and how our global economy needs to operate responsibly within these environmental boundaries to achieve the just, equitable, socially inclusive society that we need and everybody wants. And adding to the complexity is the interconnectivity of these goals. Well, we need more food to feed the hungry, we need to avoid deforestation and preserve water. Well, we need to expand our economies appropriately. We need to be inclusive and avoid exploitation and inequality. And well, we need to provide electricity for the 1 in 7 of us currently living without it, almost 1 billion people currently living without that basic amenity. We also need to do so in a way that respects the environment. And as I mentioned before, we're also told that we face a decade of recovery from COVID-19 at the same time as the UN Secretary General recently announced that this is a decade of action on the SDGs, as it's apparent that we've not been meeting many of our targets on these. But perhaps this SDG framework, this multifaceted, interconnected, wicked of wickedest problems, suite of wicked problems, you know, it holds the key to putting us on track to building back better and growing back greener and fighting back fairer from COVID-19. However, one thing is clear, we're unlikely to make much progress in this decade of recovery and action with business as usual. We'll need to change our behaviours, the way we treat each other and the environment around us, the way we work together, the way we do business, and critically, the way we educate ourselves and our young people. And so I'm kind of putting it to you guys as educators that we need to update our message, our motivation and our methods, given these urgent 21st century challenges. What is clear to me is that we need a 21st century approach to higher education, capable of delivering and developing graduates with the right skills and competencies needed to achieve these very complex goals and any other unanticipated global crisis that we might encounter along the way. Because what is clear is that higher education institutions will be the cornerstone of this recovery, and ensuring our students are better equipped than perhaps ever before for the big challenges of the future is more important than it's ever been, which is why education for sustainable development has a specific place in the SDGs itself, and SDG 4 for quality education as a key enabler for the SDGs. However, it is worth noting that despite increasing popularity of late, that ESD is nothing particularly new. Well before its explicit mention in SDG 4 of the SDGs, quality education, the UN had acknowledged the critical role that education should play in achieving sustainable development as far back as 1992 at the Rio Earth Summit, and in fact declared 2005 to 2014 or 2004 to 2014 the decade of education for sustainable development, and then followed on from that with the UN or UNESCO Global Action Plan on Education for Sustainable Development, which was to run for 5 years from 2014. And that's taken us to where we are at the moment, where UNESCO have announced and launched a new implementation framework for ESD called ESD for 2030. And this is acknowledged by the UN General Assembly through a dedicated resolution in ESD, and the new framework aims, as did its predecessors, to try and scale up that action in and around education for sustainable development and build on the lessons learned from and the successes of the decade for ESD and also the Global Action Plan that came before this. And so just as we turn to the optimism, the idealism and the confidence and fearlessness and talent of youth to explore the new frontiers of space, we'll need the youth of today and future generations to help us navigate our way to a more sustainable future here on our planet, the planet that we know. So good reason for us to mobilise the transformative power of the world's young people, as the UN Secretary General said himself just a couple of months ago at the high-level political forum. And given the number of young people in further education and higher education that we as educators have unique access to, it would appear that there is an untapped research and development resource there ready and willing to get involved. And so we should be actively looking for opportunities to provide a platform in which our students can apply their newfound knowledge to address these issues that matter most to them. After all, you know, what better way to combat our students' increasing climate anxiety is shown here in this NUS survey. We can see it increasing. 91% of students very concerned about climate change, much higher than the general population, in fact. So what better way for us to try and alleviate that climate anxiety by providing them with a platform in which they can become proactively involved in tackling it. After all, that's the way we do alleviate any kind of anxiety. It's only when we start doing stuff that it goes away. And so as our young people, or the young people of today, make their voices heard, it's clear that they, as prospective students and employees of the future, feel empowered to be selective in their choice of university, their choice of career and organisation. And so quite apart from the moral imperative on us as educators, we have a commercial responsibility to meet the demands of our marketplace. And a recent report that came out of an overview of the Climate Commission-led student stakeholder discussion for UNESCO Futures of Education, which was published only a matter of weeks ago, is rich with many student quotes demonstrating the strength of feeling among these young people and their increasing anxiety. And I've kind of peppered this presentation with a few of them as we go, because I think it's important that we really do listen to what our students are saying. And it's not only the demands of our students that we need to acknowledge here, which I'm pleased to say we are doing at Strathclyde, as I'll demonstrate shortly, but we also need to acknowledge the fact that companies worldwide are recognising the power and the responsibility of business to be a force of good on society. It's becoming more apparent that companies that continue to focus on a singular bottom line of profit at the expense of people and planet run the risk of consumer and investor backlash. But much more than that, I think that smart CEOs and organisations can see an array of new business opportunities as well underpinning these SDGs. However, I think it is fair to say that there is still, well, there is an appetite, a clear appetite from business and industry alike to tackle the SDGs. I think that they still perhaps lack the strategy, the tools, the culture, and critically the people with the right competencies needed to transform their commitments into tangible business actions. And there's an interesting observation to be had in this comparison between the 2015 and 2020 list of competencies identified by the World Economic Forum this year as being the 10 skills you need to thrive in the fourth industrial revolution. And for me, the most notable new entry in this top 10 is at number 6, and that's the competency of emotional intelligence. And it even caused a change in the graphic here to include a heart, as we can see. So HEIs, as graduate generators of today and tomorrow, therefore have a responsibility to react to the concerns and the priorities and the market needs of both their students and employers as they react to the kind of changing world around us. And I find this quote from David Orr, who's done a lot of work in transformative learning and this approach of head, heart and hands, quite amusing. What's notable, well, I'll read the quote first. The truth is that without significant precautions, education can equip people merely to be more effective vandals of the earth. If one listens carefully, it may even be possible to hear the creation or nature grown every year in late May when another batch of smart degree holding but ecologically illiterate Homo sapiens who are eager to succeed are launched into the biosphere. So what's notable here is that when he said this, it was during an oil boom and at a time when the global consensus around anthropogenic causes of climate change were still forming. The priorities of the world and our students lay elsewhere at that time. I was one of those students, in fact, interviewing for oil companies at the time. However, now the world has changed and our students are telling us it's time for change in their education. And now, if we continue to produce ecologically illiterate Homo sapiens, it's really on us as educators or as accreditation bodies or as academies or as employers and institutions and so on. That will be on us. So the students of today are asking for change to their education, one that will hopefully change this groan of nature into some almighty cheer, I would hope, in the future. And so, as I said, I'm pleased to say that here at Strathclyde, we've recognised this. And while the contribution of higher education institutions to the global sustainability or to global sustainability has long been measured by what we put on our roofs or in our walls of our buildings on campus, we're now starting to look at what we put in the minds of our students, I'm pleased to say. And so for the first time, we have at Strathclyde in our Vision 2025 strategic plan committed to embed ESD in our curricula. And the actioning of this strategic objective will be led by the education and awareness raising thread of our newly launched Centre for Sustainable Development. But it will need the engagement and the enthusiasm and the passion of our staff to make it happen. So again, I urge you to reflect on the questions that I posed at the start of the presentation. Another approach within the centre will be to identify where we are already doing this and make this more explicit to our students and perhaps even to our staff, some of whom may already be teaching sustainability or sustainable development in their offering without even fully acknowledging this. And also to draw upon the expertise of staff already doing so to support others in doing the same and raise that awareness and build that ESD capacity across our institution. And we'll also identify where we're not doing as much as we possibly could or indeed should, and work to support staff to fill these gaps with meaningful content and learning experiences around sustainable development. And of course, we'll continue to monitor the progress and learn lessons as we go, with a view to growing our ESD offering in both our undergraduate and postgraduate programmes. However, we should acknowledge that, well, this may be the first time we've included a specific and explicit commitment to embed ESD in our revision strategy. Strathclyde does have a strong tradition of being a socially progressive institution dedicated to making a positive and lasting societal impact. And so aligning these global goals with our educational offering fits well with our ethos of useful learning. But to do this effectively, we need to advance the change in teaching and learning processes, bringing in new approaches that focus on, as the Global Action Plan from UNESCO has stated here, that focus on developing the competencies in our graduates by stimulating them to ask questions, analyse, be empathetic, think critically, make decisions. One that offers opportunities for more interactive, exploratory, action-oriented, problem-based, experiential, transformative learning, all of these. But in short, and in the words of Sir Jonathan Porritt, Vice-Chancellor of Keele University, who are very active in ESD, we should be preparing our students for the work of the world, not just the world of work. So ensuring our students become effective and competent employees, technologists, innovators, and business leaders of the future, but also proactive and responsible global citizens. So that means, where appropriate, moving away from more conventional lecture-based instructional approach to teaching and learning and subject-based learning in the traditional classroom setting, which has been somewhat disrupted of late, and I'm still trying to find my own way around Zoom, as you saw earlier on when I'm delivering my classes myself. But up until now, this has been the kind of de facto standard, the go-to approach to teaching and learning in higher education. And because this approach, well, perhaps it's effective and it's certainly resource efficient, it's a resource efficient means of delivering subject-based content, that's undeniable, but it may not be the most effective way of developing the full range of competencies our graduates will need to face future challenges more effectively. So there is certainly a place for it, but I don't think it's the be-all and end-all that it has always been. And perhaps recent events will have given cause for thought in and around the changing of that particular approach to teaching and learning in higher education. So it might be a positive legacy in terms of higher education institutions from this pandemic. And so we need to make our students or take our students on a transformational learning journey that involves cognitive, emotional development and offers us through engagement with real communities, or at least with real world problems affecting real communities. And as I mentioned before, sometimes referred to as this head, hearts and hands approach to learning. And so by contrast to the more conventional approach to teaching and learning that I've touched on there, that more conventional subject-based approach, inquiry-based or research-based teaching and learning refers to a range of pedagogical approaches which have student-led research at their heart, focusing on changing student and staff roles and the emphasis of the teaching content and learning practice, effectively supporting students to become more proactive participants in that learning process, and reaching that tipping point where they can become knowledge producers as opposed to exclusively knowledge consumers in tackling these real world problems. And changing also staff, student roles and relationships, leading to what I would consider to be a more equitable teaching and learning relationship, one where staff and students become partners in that learning process. And so research-based learning involves students in the problem formulation, asking them to understand what and where they can contribute to what's already been done in the area, and in a sense, kind of defining and designing their own open-ended questions or problems before even thinking about how they would go about answering or solving them themselves. In its simplest form, I suppose we could really think about research-based learning as learning by doing. And it's generally accepted, although this particular diagram has been a subject of some controversy, but it's generally accepted that learning by doing, or action-based or active learning, is a very effective in increasing retention rates and discourages students to indulge in more superficial surface learning. And so aligning research-based learning with the context of sustainable development allows the learning objectives to essentially be framed as a set of purposeful tasks aimed at making some form of positive societal impact, which can work to provide a greater incentive and motivation for the students to engage with the learning process than simply that of passing an assessment. And in fact, my own experience is that sometimes the assessment, rightly or wrongly, can almost become incidental. And research-based education for sustainable development, as I said, can motivate our students to actively participate in this deeper level of learning and understanding, motivated not only by their own personal academic gain, but by their potential to make a difference to the lives of more vulnerable communities, effectively raising the stakes to some extent and consequently the motivation levels in our students. And as Dale Carnegie put it, learning is an active process. We learn by doing. Only knowledge that is used sticks in your mind, or as one of the students in the report I just mentioned to you put it even better than the both of us, you remember experiential stuff more than sitting in a class. And perhaps the reason for this, why we remember the experiential stuff, may be down to the fact that we are more inclined to reflect on these experiences. What went well, what didn't, and why. Maybe it's because we care more about these experiences. We feel something on some emotional level through these experiences, especially if these learning experiences are presented in a real world context and have real world benefits and consequences attached to them. And so as John Dewey here, one of the fathers of progressive education, which I would consider to be effectively education for sustainable development and experiential learning, put it, we don't learn from experience, we learn from reflecting on an experience. And so here at Strathclyde, we've developed a practical means of embedding research-based education for sustainable development into our curricula that will offer an experiential learning experience, allowing students to become proactive learners and work in partnership with academics and their future employers to progress the SDG agenda. So I just want to play for you a very short video, but I think I might have to unshare my screen so that I can check the computer sound box in order to let you hear the sound. Just hold on a wee second and bear with me. So I'm hoping that you can hear the sound here. Let me know, Louise, if there's any issues.
At Strathclyde, vertically integrated projects, or VIPs as they are known, allow our students to work alongside. At Strathclyde, vertically integrated projects, or VIPs as they are known, allow our students to work alongside research, staff and academics on active research projects throughout their time at university. This experience allows students to develop a deeper level of subject learning, acquire academic credits, and develop the wide range of competencies employers look for in our graduates. Research teams can also be multidisciplinary, involving collaborative working between students from all faculties and departments, and so a typical VIP team may involve students not only from different year groups, but significantly from different disciplines. The VIP model offers undergraduate students the opportunity to work in partnership on real-world research projects, while also mobilising and challenging students to become active now in tackling the most pressing global challenges of our time. We have 12 VIP projects involving more than 200 students, each focusing on a primary SDG. One such project is the Energy for Development VIP, which focuses on SDG 7, ensuring affordable and clean energy for all. Here, engineering, business and social science students come together to design appropriate and sustainable energy solutions. Students also get the opportunity to install off-grid systems and test their solutions in remote rural communities in Africa and India, completing 12 village school installations to date. Other VIP projects have focused on health and well-being, such as our drug discovery team, where engineers, biochemists and mathematicians have worked together to develop new techniques that can be used in the discovery of new antibiotics. Our education-focused VIPs partner with local schools in low participation areas of Glasgow and rural communities in sub-Saharan Africa. The VIP for Sustainable Development programme, getting you ready for the world of work by tackling the work of the world. Join us in making a difference through useful learning.
Okay. Okay, so hopefully everybody could hear that okay, and you can still hear me. So this kind of interconnected and multifaceted nature of the SDGs requires this multidisciplinary approach. And in a sense, it has the potential here to force academics and students to break out of these silos. Okay, sorry, I'm just getting feedback there that you can still hear me. Good, thank you. Who was that? Thanks, Verna. So I think this is another thing at universities and higher education that we haven't been particularly good at. We're trying to break out of our teaching and research silos and interact with and rely upon the knowledge and expertise of those in different fields. And that goes for our students as well. And so I think we should really be asking ourselves, why has that been the case? I mean, I even joke about this, going back as far as, when I was an undergraduate, I joke that the only non-engineering students I ever came into contact with myself was in the student union bar. And, and arguably that's still the case in many universities across the UK and probably across the world as well. So we should be thinking about offering our students a more authentic, real-world experience, one that does involve talking with and working collaboratively with disciplines outside of your own on real-world global issues. And I think that this programme offers that opportunity. But unlike my introduction, this approach isn't rocket science, but implementing it within higher education institutions is challenging. Convincing people of change is often difficult. Changes to entrenched teaching methods, changes to tightly regulated curricula, changes to degree accreditation criteria, changes in priority, changes of mindset. And so it needs support from the top down and from the bottom up, and from inside and outside these institutions, from staff, from employers, from government, from quality assurance agencies, from professional bodies and academies. And so, to quote the words of John Maynard Keynes, of all people, perhaps the difficulty here lies not so much in developing new ideas as escaping from the old ones, but education is fundamentally about change. And as one surveyed student said, education should be about empowering people, teaching students that they can actually affect change. And I'd say that we also need to empower staff to make the changes required. But I hope that we've shown here that Strathclyde is providing our students and our staff with that platform to express themselves and to channel their concerns and anxieties about climate change and sustainable development and our society and our common future into something positive and productive. Because at Strathclyde, we feel it's our responsibility not only to produce top quality graduates, as we do, but also to invest in producing socially responsible and active global citizens, and that we can leverage this idealism and optimism and the talent of youth that I mentioned before in our students to make a positive contribution to society now, and not necessarily have to wait until they've graduated before they do that. And so I'd like to finish with just a few quotes that I hope promote what I think will be the programme, which I hope will promote the programme. And I think that another thing that we have to acknowledge as well is that, we're going to have to work in close partnership across our institution across the higher education sector to ensure that we have a coordinated approach to this, what is effectively the reorienting of education and learning to ensure that graduates of tomorrow are equipped with the relevant knowledge, skills, values, attributes, attitudes that they need and that society will need of them. So here's the judges' comments on our programme following our recent success at the International Green Gown Awards for Student Engagement. That was part of the HESE event that took place at the United Nations High-Level Political Forum in July. We were obviously delighted to have this acknowledgement. But I think I was particularly delighted with this quote because, it recognises that what we're trying to do here is not only produce exceptional graduates, but we're trying to make them fit for this kind of new world and make them fit for the purposes of employers for the 21st century and for society for the 21st century as well. And I thought it would be quite fitting to almost end on a quote from one of our students who's participated in our VIP for Sustainable Development programme. And you can see here, this came from Callum, who, as you're looking at it, is the chap in the nice light blue t-shirt on the far left there, one of students on my particular VIP programme, the Energy for Development VIP programme. And he said, after completing his VIP year, and that culminated in him actually going to the Gambia and installing an off-grid PV system. He said that the highlight was seeing the obvious difference that electricity was going to make to the school. The whole experience had really reinforced the reason for coming to university to become an engineer, that being to help people. However, the quote I would like to end on is a slightly modified version of one that I started with. And so when people ask us why the need for this disruptive change in the way higher education institutions educate our students to advance global sustainable development, then we'll say because this is a challenge that we must accept, one that we cannot postpone, and one that we need to win. And so at this point, I'd also like to take any questions that anybody has, but also remind you of the questions I asked you at the beginning, which were these. And so if anyone has anything they'd like to share regarding your response to these questions, as well as ask us questions, then please feel free to do so, because I'd be really keen to hear what you've got to say. And at that point, I'll hand back to Louise, I think, and I'll stop sharing this screen.
Great, thanks very much for that, Scott. So I'll invite Steve to come back as well. We've had a few questions in. So perhaps the first one we could answer, Scott, is do our students formally or informally reflect and evaluate their learning, particularly considering ESD, during their time at Strathclyde?
So that's obviously a good question. And I think the honest answer is that we could be doing that probably better. But the reassuring answer is that it's something that we're currently trying to address. So we're actually working with other academics and even small enterprises who work in and around the area of learning coaching and such like, to try and develop a competency framework that we can actually have our students effectively self-assess themselves in terms of how those competencies are developing, and track how those competencies are developing through their kind of VIP journey, if you like. So I think that is something that's very important. It's not only important just for the student to be aware of that, because I think a lot of the time students kind of, they are developing these competencies, but they're maybe unaware that they're developing them. So I think being able to kind of point them to that and highlight that where it's happening is definitely of use to them. But also from a programme level, if we are able to then assess or evaluate, is perhaps a better word, evaluate how our students are developing these competencies across the programme, then that allows us to evaluate or assess the efficacy of our programme. Is it doing what we think it is doing? I mean, currently we've got lots of student testimonies telling us that, it's making them be the engineer they want to be, or it's helping them develop collaborative competencies, or they're better at team working, or they've developed independent research skills and these kind of things. But we have no formal mechanism at the moment or way of doing that. But that's something that we're currently working on by developing this competency framework.
Another question we've had here is VIP open to students studying via distance learning at a UK-based university if the student is based outside the UK, which I think is probably quite relevant to what we're doing with the VIP consortium in COIL. Yeah.
So, well, do you want to speak about that, Louise? Do you want to take that one on then?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so obviously the situation that we find ourselves in now means that we've had to kind of reassess how we run VIP this year. But we've also tried to think about, what are the potential opportunities that come out of this situation. And one of those is the ways in which we connect and work with the VIP consortium, which is made up of 40 universities internationally that all have VIP at their institutions. And one thing that we're now trying to facilitate is collaborative online international learning, or COIL. So we're trialling that this year and setting up some of our VIP teams informally with other VIP teams, other institutions, mainly in the States. So yeah, I think the current situation means that we are able to kind of do some more distance learning with VIP. It's not something that we've necessarily done formally in the past, but it's certainly a possibility.
And of course, as you've said, Louise, the fact that we're having to move online with all our teaching, even our home students, we're having to communicate in an online fashion like this through our VIPs. So, but we don't see that posing any particular challenges. Some of our VIPs do require some laboratory access for, hardware development and things like that. But, again, that can be managed with, the necessary social distancing and COVID secure measures being put in place, as we're having to do with other practical work and, certainly in the engineering faculty. So yes, I think that, I see no reason why the VIP for Sustainable Development model couldn't work in that kind of remote online setting.
If I could just come in here, an important aspect is that the students participating in this program get credit for it. That's the way you really ensure that buy-in, and it's part of their course. So if you're at another university, you would need to arrange with that university that they would allow you to recognize the work you're doing remotely with us as part of your degree program. So it would probably need some sort of collaborative arrangement, but that shouldn't be insurmountable. We have lots of those.
I have a question here. So do you have a story for your students similar to the JFK moon mission for our challenge today? We know that we know what we don't want in the future, but I miss the new moon for us, something to aim for. What's a challenge that highly motivates us from a positive position?
Well, I don't know who wants to do you want to take that one, Louise?
Well, I don't know. I suppose it's how do you look at a situation? I don't know what we'd say is our well, I suppose, what does the moon represent? It seems to be this insurmountable challenge. I think climate change in a lot of ways seems like an insurmountable challenge, and that's something that we use to try and motivate our students. The SDGs themselves represent broad and complex challenges, and the great thing about them is that they are largely achievable if we work together. So I think that seems a bit in some ways.
I'd also probably make the point that we actually see them planting the flag in the moon, because they actually got there and managed to safely return them to Earth. So that was a successful and completed mission. Well, I think, you know, where we are with the SDGs, unfortunately, is probably far from that. So it's still mission ongoing, I think. So that's probably another reason why we don't have a comparable image to show at present. Although, you know, the work that our students do as part of this programme is inspirational, and we have many accounts in both in image form and other forms that show that and demonstrate what they're doing and the impact that they're having.
Great.
COVID, the situation we're in now of managing a pandemic, you know, there's lots of different responses. There are people working on vaccines. There are others trying to do data modeling to find out, well, how is it really transmitted? What can we do that will allow us to go about our normal lives without passing it on? And also economic activity. That's, you know, you saw Scott, the graph there, that, you know, this is the biggest dip compared to anything in the past. Has never been on this scale before. So how are we going to deal with that? So we're not short of really big and slightly frightening challenges for the future.
I saw a question there, or a comment there, Louise, from Christine Calder from Angus College, because I know Christine. And she was mentioning the fact that she sees this as a model that could potentially fit within further education as well. And I think it would be good to point out that something we have considered when we talked about this kind of vertical integration. We've actually thought about, you know, where does that end? You know, at present within Strathclyde and within universities, that vertical integration is confined to the years of a graduate, or potentially even, you know, postgraduate study as well. But, you know, what's to stop us having an integrated approach right through all tiers of our education system, integrated right down, you know, across further education, down into school level, you know, and really connecting all of our students across our entire education system up through this type of module or this type of program and this approach, focusing them on research, tailored research in and around sustainable development.
I've had a question here that I think is quite prescient given the what we've seen over the course of the pandemic. So do all students and staff receive training on decolonisation so as to ensure ethical ways of working with local communities? I know that this is something that particularly you, Scott, on your projects, you've been really aware of the fact to avoid you know, what we call volunteerism with these projects. I wonder if that's something you could speak about.
Yeah. So the answer is that we, you know, our research staff don't undertake any formal training on that. Perhaps they should, but certainly our research staff have got a lot of experience in the area, have worked in country themselves, many for, you know, significant periods of time, and, you know, and we fully understand that certainly in our research area and around energy access and developing off-grid solutions and cooking solutions for communities, that, you know, that the community and the stakeholders and the users or the potential users of any solutions have to be at the heart of the design, and, you know, and also in developing the needs assessment. So, you know, not being presumptive about what the needs are of a community, understanding what those needs are. So I suppose what I would say is that our students who get involved in this learn from the experience of our staff who are very experienced in that area, but we don't actually go through any formal training programme as such.
Good. So we're happy to take more questions. I think that's has answered the questions that were originally asked. So Scott and Steve, I wonder if it'd be useful to talk about, you know, what are the sort of challenges that we've had when it comes to setting up new VIP projects. Like all three of us have worked on our own VIPs. You know, maybe what's something that we've seen as the biggest kind of success or benefit for students and for staff. Maybe that's something we could reflect on.
Steve?
Well, I think the biggest barrier is finding space in the curriculum. is most curricula are quite full, and it's to take things out. And it's not that you're not teaching them, you're just delivering them in a different way. But that's often quite a challenge. There's often quite a bit of resistance. Generally, you find in a university, the enthusiasm for VIP comes from the students, who are incredibly enthusiastic, and from the senior management, who love it and think it's a brilliant idea. And the harder bit is bringing along the organization and in the middle, and all the rules and regulations, and getting those ironed out to allow students to participate in these courses.
Yeah, I think another challenge that perhaps drives some of that, it's a bit of a chicken and egg. It's hard to know what comes first, but is around degree accreditation. And certainly, my experience of engineering degrees and speaking to people in other higher education institutions keen to promote ESD in their institution and around engineering in particular, there is this kind of feeling of it being a bit of a barrier rather than it being a bit of an enabler. And in fact, I actually joined a webinar recently by the Engineering Professors Council, and that's what it was called. It was basically talking about, is accreditation seen as an enabler or a barrier to innovation in teaching? And the very fact, I kind of thought, the very fact that you're having a webinar called that suggests that, there is many who feel that it is acting as a barrier. And I think it is in some cases. So I think we would like to see more in terms of learning outcomes and degree accreditation criteria being very focused on sustainable development to allow us to open up the space in our curriculum for this type of teaching. Because at present, that can be used as a bit of a reason for pushback. This module or this program doesn't fit within our degree accreditation, which is very tightly regulated. And so I'd like to see more work done at that level in order to open up space for this type of teaching in programs like VIP for SD.
I think another barrier that we often come against is, how can we motivate staff to want to kind of start their own projects? Because as we all know, workloads are often high and unmanageable, and a lot of staff feel that they can't take on a VIP project. But the great thing about a VIP project is what you get out of it as the academic lead. We always ask that VIP projects that are proposed are linked to the lead's academic research. In this way, what VIP projects turn into are your students are sort of like mini research assistants, and you're their supervisor. It's not the same. I suppose that VIP doesn't come with the same demands as a normal teaching load. You're the supervisor working with the students to produce research, and after a few years, what we hope is that students will continue to take part over a number of years. So the ideal student would join a VIP team in their second year perhaps, and continue to their third, even fourth year, and perhaps even on to postgraduate. That's like the ideal scenario. And what you get is a real kind of investment from the students in the work, because as we've sort of said, they often respond so well to being given the responsibility and the chance to really pursue what they're interested in. And it sort of makes your life easier, really, if you have students like that who are invested and dedicated to the project. So as much as setting up a VIP project, of course, takes work, what we hope is that it gets easier as the years go on, and that you continue to reap the benefits of that work. So there's a lot to consider.
I think you're right, Louise. Essentially, most academics will have supervised a project at some point, several projects, in fact, whether they be individual projects or dissertations or group projects. And essentially that is what this is. It's a group project, but it can involve different disciplines, and it can involve academics from different faculties. And I see that then that should really be seen as an opportunity, I think, by researchers and academics and teaching staff to connect with other departments and other faculties, grow your network, open up new opportunities for new research calls or new teaching experiences for your students. So I see it more as trying to promote this more as one of opportunity than an additional burden, because it is, as you've said, it's fairly light touch, it's very student-centred. It really amounts to an hour's supervision meeting a week, you know, and if you happen to have a PhD student working with you, then, and it complements their area, then very often that PhD student can support that supervision role as well. And certainly I would, you know, PhD students I've had involved have been, you know, a really, really vital supervision resource, I would say, for me personally. So if you have that available to you, then that's definitely something that you should think about including in your kind of supervisory model for a VIP. But essentially, I would encourage people just to try it out. I mean, start off small. You don't need 12 students in your first VIP team. You know, start off with 2 or 3. Get their first project could be about trying to define the scope of the VIP project. Because as I said before, that's what research-based or inquiry-based learning is all about. It's about getting the students involved in the problem definition, not just the problem solution.
The key thing about the key way that VIP delivers is, you know, in a normal project, you get a group of students, you train them up, and they're just beginning to make some progress on the problem. And it's the end of the academic year, they take exams, they disappear, and you start the whole thing again with a different group. With VIP, you've got that overlap between the academic years. So when you come back at the next year, after your first year, you've got a group of students starting, and most of them have already spent some time on the project, and there's just a few new ones to be integrated. And that way the burden, the supervision burden should really reduce, and it should be the continuing students are training the other students how to integrate into the team. So that's a fantastic experience for them. That's where you get the sort of student-led learning. And the role of the academic can be to step back and becomes much more of a mentor and much lighter touch.
And through that work, we, as Steve said, we hope that the students gain, you know, professional skills, but also the competencies associated with education for sustainable development. And in fact, that's something that we've been working on, is to think about how can we reward students for that type of learning. And it's actually something that we might now pose to a student team to ask them to look into, you know, creating a tool that can track and sort of track the development of those kind of competencies that you get through experiential learning. So that'll be a bit of a meta kind of VIP project where we're getting the students to really assess VIP. So I think, as Scott's kind of indicated as well, it's such a flexible model as well. You could start really small. It can really apply to any discipline as well. And for those of you who are teaching here at Strathclyde, if you're interested at all, then please contact me. The process for proposing and starting up a VIP is really straightforward and fairly informal. It just requires sending a brief kind of outline, a brief proposal to us, and we just discuss it with you. We might suggest ways in which it could better fit the VIP model, suggest ways it could be better integrated, or suggest ways it could better align with the SDGs. But largely, it's very flexible and up to you what you'd like to do. And as much as the vertical integration refers to, you know, students from multiple year groups working together, as Scott said, it doesn't have to be perfect at the beginning. It could just be a couple of year groups that are involved with just 2 or 3 students. And we recommend that you start small.
There's kind of 2 ways to look at the vertical integration. There's a vertical integration from the student's perspective. So that's ensuring that a student has multiple years in which they can participate, maybe not necessarily consecutive years, but there are multiple years, maybe 2 or 3 years in which they can participate. So therefore, giving them more space and time to develop their expertise in a particular area. But then there's also, you can look at the vertical integration from the project perspective, where you have different students from different year groups all working together as well. And that's where the kind of mentoring role kind of comes in as well, as that Steve was mentioning.
Yeah, the university senate, the deans have all committed to growing this program significantly at Strathclyde. So, and we're here, Scott and Louise and myself are here to help you to do that, and to support you and to put mechanism in place to make that easier.
And I think there's, I can imagine that some people might say, is it the time to begin a VIP project with all the upheaval that we're all currently experiencing? But I think one thing that we've sort of realised is that actually this is a really good opportunity, because VIP actually, because it's project-based group work, and of course it's caused some problems with projects that require lab access, but a lot of them don't actually, they can work kind of remotely and online, they can work together. And what we found is that I think those students are finding that to be a really engaging learning experience. And it's a real opportunity for them to kind of be knowledge producers as well as knowledge sort of consumers, as we often say. Especially now, it's really trying to keep them engaged with their learning experience.
And once it's online, then exchanges become easy. If you've got VIP teams in New York University or in China, then you can work together on a team, and it doesn't matter where in the world you are, as long as you sort out the time difference. So you can actually have these cross-site teams. And what we discussed at one point was having maybe an exchange where it could be a 3-year exchange, where maybe the first 2 years are online, and then the 3rd year is actually going to the new site. And I think it would be much more productive to go to a new site having engaged with that team online for a couple of years beforehand. You'll already feel like you're friends with the other members of the team, and feel much more comfortable, going to that new site in the future. So we've got lots of ideas how we can grow this in different ways.
Absolutely. So we haven't had any new questions in, and we've got about 10 minutes left. So I wondered, Scott and Steve, is there anything that you feel you'd like to kind of add, or something you haven't been able to get to yet?
Yes, well, I would just urge people, if you do have any ideas, obviously go away and have a think about it. Is this something that you think that you would be interested in doing? Do you have any ideas for a VIP that you think you could start up? Essentially, you could see this also as an opportunity to think about how you take your research and put it in that context of sustainable development and explore that area. So there may be people here who are doing research in an area that they don't necessarily consider to be, or that goes for just normal teaching as well, in an area they don't really consider to be connected to sustainable development. And as Steve mentioned at the outset, it's actually quite challenging to find an area that's not connected to sustainable development or one of these goals in some way. But certainly this is an opportunity for you to think about your research and think, well, what would happen if I took that from that context and put it in a public health context? So we've got VIPs like that. We've got the Smart Voice VIP that Gaetano De Caterina from my department is involved with Wendy Cohen from Speech and Language Therapy. And it's taken signal processing techniques to conduct some analysis on the voice recordings of young children with a particular condition where they end up with warts on their vocal cords that, if left, can ultimately prove fatal. But Wendy, as a speech and language therapist, can hear that. She can actually hear it in their voices. And so by working with Gaetano, who's never worked in that public health setting before, the two of them came together and they've created a VIP that brings together, students and experts from SLT and our engineering students. And we've also got business students looking at that, because that's essentially going to be an app that's going to be delivered via a smartphone. And our business students who are just starting this year looking at that will be looking at what the kind of marketing opportunities are for something like that as well. So it's about trying to be creative, be a bit inventive, and be a bit exploratory yourself, and and take it in the best sense, take advantage of that free resource that we have, and highly motivated resource that we have in our student body.
I think if you look at other universities, a lot of them have looked at sustainable development through their estates, through reducing waste and plastics, which is all good things to be doing, but it doesn't involve the undergraduates. Or they've looked at having a module or a course where you sit students down and you talk at them about about sustainable development. Where what we've done is we're able to get undergraduates involved in real projects and making a real difference through the things they're doing while getting a great educational experience at the same time.
I think that's the key thing. I mean, for me, it's that very small word "for" in education for sustainable development. It's not education about sustainable development. It's not education on sustainable development. It's education to progress the sustainable development agenda. And I think that that's what the VIP programme, through this research-based approach to ESD, delivers.
Absolutely. So do either of you have anything to add to that, or is that a good place to end, do you think?
Yep, I think so. Other than to say, we're available if you have any ideas or there's anything you want to discuss, then you can approach any of the three of us and we can try and help you to take that forward.
And I think that goes also for, whether you're an academic at Strathclyde or if there are people here from other institutions looking to perhaps adopt this type of model or thinking about, how it might fit within your institution. Then again, we're more than happy to support and discuss, our experiences with you in order to try and help you do something similar where you are.
Yeah, absolutely. And we can even offer an introduction to the VIP consortium. We've already helped 2 and soon to be 3 universities join the consortium, including St Andrews and Bath. And at the moment we're working with Strathmore University in Nairobi, who are going to be joining the VIP consortium soon. So yeah, please do get in touch if you're out with Strathclyde. Okay. Well, thanks very much everyone for joining us. As Tom said in the chat, this recording will be on the Centre for Sustainable Development website, and I imagine that our contact details will also be there. So yeah, thank you very much. And thanks also to Scott and Steve.
Thanks, Louise. Thanks, Steve. Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.